Domestic violence is on the rise during the coronavirus outbreak. Today, I talk one-on-one with Butch Kennedy, the CEO of REALMAD, Real Men Against Domestic Violence, and the CEO of Palmetto Hope Network for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Butch Kennedy, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, my friend. How you been?
Oh, I've been doing great. Yourself?
Great, man. I've been blessed, man. It's been a beauty. I mean, even though it's 2020, we have the COVID and everything going on. And I bought the year and this year getting married, so I'm happy. I'm blessed.
Yes, indeed, and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Obviously, you are the founder and CEO of the Palmetto Hope Network and REALMAD, Real Men Against Domestic Violence. How real is domestic violence in 2020, Butch?
I mean, with the COVID going on, it's even worse. A lot of people don't really realize this, but now, abusers are actually home with their abusers are actually home with their victims 24/7. I mean, before you probably go to work or something, but now you're stuck with each other for 24 hours a day, and there's no getting away from that. So yeah.
As a matter of fact, I got to take you to Nashville because this is an article from the NBC station in Nashville, and the headline reads this: Nashville seeks uptick in domestic violence homicides during COVID-19. And let me read this from Becky Billard. She is the Senior Director of Programs for the Metro National Office of Family Safety. She says this, quote, "The pandemic has created a lot of toxicity within homes and a lot of building pressure and tension within homes that may have been easier to release pre-pandemic." She also says this too: before the pandemic, they would do a lot of obviously in-person collaborative services at the Safety Center for their domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, human trafficking, and sexual assault clients. What pressure and tension are you hearing about now when it comes to domestic violence?
It's the same. It's the same thing, except for it's heightened because now just like you said, you're home 24 hours a day with that person who's abusing you. You have no way to get out, no way to escape. And so everything is heightened. We're in a state of emergency, and a lot of people don't really understand, even though we're in a pandemic, and we have other issues as well. I mean, I've always considered domestic violence to be a pandemic, and it's been something that I've been fighting for the past 14 years. So I get that 100%.
And what is the biggest difference between 14 years ago and right now when you think of domestic violence?
Well, I think more people are educated now. I think more people know what it is. We've been working hard to get it out in the open, to get people to not be afraid to speak out about it. Back in the day, it was something that was hidden. Nobody ever wanted to talk about it. Quintin wasn't around to have Butch on the show to talk about it, and nobody else was really talking about it. So what's happening different now is that people are realizing, and with the advent of with the explosion, so to speak, of social media and other platforms, we're able to talk about it.
What are you talking about right now?
Well, I'm trying to get more men involved in ending violence against women. So my main thing and my main focus is because, I tell men, I tell people this all the time, that the majority of men would never hit or abuse a woman. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% is what it's been quoted as. But it's like almost 19 to 20% of men that will. The sad reality is that the 80% of men that won't do it don't hold the 20% accountable for it. So that's what I'm working for. I'm working for to get a group of men together that can speak out against violence against women.
And she also goes on, let me go back to what she says. She says before the pandemic, they would do an in-person collaborative services at the Safety Center, domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, human trafficking, and sexual assault clients. Let me ask you this. What services are being provided right now to domestic violence victims here in Charleston?
Well, that's the issue. The shelter's closed. It's COVID going on, right? I mean, we receive tons of calls. We receive calls every day, and we have the Hope Walk every year to walk across a bridge where we raise funds so that we can help victims, and that's what we do. We've been helping more victims now than we have in quite some time. So, there's really nothing for victims, and I hate to say it like that. There's really nothing that we can really do. We can put them in a hotel, right, and we can feed them and things like that there, but eventually, even that money dries up. A lot of people, not only is domestic violence going up, but unemployment's going up as well. So a lot of people have lost their jobs too as well. So that kind of adds to the issues that we have as well.
And how much money do you all need right now to curb domestic violence?
Wow, I mean that's like that's a tough question because it just happens so often that people don't really understand, and it depends upon how we look at it. Even if we were to have a safe house as well, just like my sister's house, we always thought the answer was another my sister's house, right? But with COVID going on, you can't put people's lives in jeopardy to run them. So it's a difficult situation, man, and nobody's figured out how we should handle that.
As a matter of fact, the lady from Nashville goes on to say this. Now, with the pandemic, the person who's being abusive in that home can use the pandemic as an excuse to isolate that person even further. So the pandemic is certainly being used as a tool that is, to further abuse. She goes on to say there's also a lot of stress during this time. Quote, if you're adding stress of a pandemic on top of something that's already abusive, that already has a lot of issues of power and control within the home, and it can be explosive. The pandemic is certainly being used as a tool to further abuse. What other tools are known in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, to me, everything that you just said was on point. I mean, the pandemic just has brought everything out to the forefront. There's nothing different except for now you're just stuck there, right? You have no place else to go. Before we could tell people, we'll send you here, we'll send you there, we'll send you here. There's certain places that we can't send victims to now because of the pandemic, because certain cities are not allowing people to come into their cities as well, or states as well. Right. It's more of a difficult situation now than it ever has been. So wow, that's a difficult question to ask because there's really no response to it. There's really no answer to a lot of these questions, just simply because of the pandemic and people's fear of the unknown, basically, because we don't know. If we can go around the corner and say the pandemic's around the corner, everybody would stay from around the corner, right? We don't know where it is, we don't know what it is, and we don't know how it can affect us or whatever. So it's difficult.
And you're on social media all the time. Yeah, very much so. And you obviously you're on social media all the time, and you're getting the message out that, hey, stop domestic violence. How crucial is that message now?
Well, yeah, it's crucial. It's extremely crucial. But what makes it more, what I'm really trying to do now is get men to hold other men accountable, right? So if we start talking about it and we start putting it out there a little bit more, then men will probably think twice before we abuse. And a lot of people realize that I say men a lot, but domestic violence isn't just male on female. Sometimes females are abusive as well. So I have that conversation with both groups. I don't just think that every time it's the male that's always abusive. There's some females out there that abuses as well, and putting them all in the same environment nonstop, 24 hours a day, it's just it's just like the tip of the iceberg, man. Sooner or later, the pot's going to spill over, and you're going to have what it is that we have. And it's a cultural issue to me, man. It's how we were raised, the culture of men and manhood, and what we believe our male beliefs. That, in my opinion, it leads to some of this violence as well. So we're working our way around figuring that out as well. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just getting an incoming message. Okay, go ahead.
And obviously, you talk about female to male, obviously domestic violence. How difficult is that to articulate to the average person?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of men who when I talk to, because I talk to a lot of men about domestic violence, a lot of them ask me, am I having the same conversation with women? And of course I do. I have a conversation with men and women. I mean, men shouldn't hit women, women shouldn't hit men as well. It goes hand in hand. So that's usually what we do. We make sure that we add both into the spectrum, because in order for us to eliminate the problem, we got to address the entire problem. We can't just take pieces and parts of it and think that we're going to fix anything. We got to fix the family dynamic, and we got to teach more healthy relationships, and that's what it is that we do.
And what are the family dynamics these days?
It's funny because the family dynamics these days are mostly single-parented homes, and most of them are female head of the household, right? So sometimes when the male is interjected into that situation, and the female's been the head of the household for a while, sometimes there begins to become a tension, because men believe that we're supposed to be the head of the household, and that's not always the case.
And more people, I'm pretty sure you know this, are buying firearms during the coronavirus outbreak than normal times. What data are you looking at when it comes to domestic violence and firearms?
Well, it's all they're always hand in hand. South Carolina has always been a firearm pro Second Amendment state, and that's the state that we live in. And every time there's a gun present within a domestic violence situation, that just makes it more lethal for the victim as well. So we talk about that as well. I'm personally an ex-military, and I am also a gun owner. I'm a CCP, but my wife is actually ex-law enforcement,
Right.
and she's a gun owner as well. So, but sometimes I believe that it's the mentality of some of our individuals with the guns that is part of the issue as well. And we fight that with groups like Arm in Arm and the Brady Chapter and all these groups that have been working to reduce gun violence in our community, which is a whole nother total animal, man. I mean, we still got kids that are still shooting each other in the streets of North Charleston today, man. I read something the other day that said North Charleston was 13th of the most dangerous cities in the United States. And that, to me, that's mind-boggling. That's just crazy, man. But I did a post last year of all of the victims who were murdered via gun violence last year. And I didn't think the post would ever end. I didn't think the pictures would ever end. There were like 60, 60, 66, 68 of them that were murdered. And it's just crazy in the Tri-County area.
And I failed to mention this to you, but obviously when you talk about male and female, well, male to female domestic violence, you also talk about female to male violence, as we just talked about as well. But then there's also this intimate partner violence versus domestic violence. What's your definition of that?
Well, same-sex relationships is one thing that a lot of people don't even consider to be domestic violence, same-sex relationships. Yeah, so intimate partner could also be boyfriend and girlfriend that are not actually married as well, or don't have a kid involved. So those are my takes on intimate partner.
As a matter of fact, this is from the Human Rights Watch. It reads this: authorities everywhere should be worried about reports of rising gender-based violence in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and associated lockdowns. And this is from Amanda Klasing, the acting co-director of the Women's Rights at Human Rights Watch. What contacts are you looking at, Butch, when it comes to gender-based violence?
I'm just looking at it from the perspective that, that gender-based violence is the same as domestic violence. It's all the same to me. It's all in the same apple to me. And my main goal is to reduce it. And how I reduce it is through education. What I do is I sit down and have conversations with men and women about, basically about keeping our hands to ourselves and respecting one another. It's all about respect. And you don't really beat up on someone that you have a lot of respect for. So that's what we talk about.
And obviously, crises are often further limited women's ability to escape abuse and see their abusers held to account, obviously. And that places victims in the environment without appropriate access to services such as safe shelters and other things that you just mentioned. What services do domestic violence victims need now?
Wow, man, a lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of victims of domestic violence actually have nothing. I mean, they start from ground up. They have to rebuild from ground up, man, and it's crazy. So they need everything. So the thing about our organization is we're with them from ground up. I mean, sometimes it just might be clothes. Sometimes all the time it's always food. And then it used to be getting our kids stuff to go to school, getting them clothes and everything, and food to go to school. So there's so many different needs that victims need, and they need them all the time. So the issue that I have with a lot of organizations is that when we help them one time, we think that we're one and done with them, right? If we put you up for a hotel for a week or so and you're done, we get you a job and everything, then you think that we're done, but we're never done. The victim of domestic violence needs help all the time. So we still speak to victims that we've helped years ago. So it's just like a family, a network of victims. So there's always need for victims.
And what is the unemployment rate of, among domestic violence victims?
I mean, it's crazy. I don't know exactly what the rate is, but I know that the majority of victims are usually unemployed. So usually that's another way that they're isolated and another way that they're controlled, because the person who is employed is the person with the money and controlling the purse strings and and whatnot. So that person feels like they're in charge and they get to make all the decisions. And you got to abide by my rules type of mentality. But unemployment ranks high, and it's really high in our community. And I've often said that the most oppressed person in the community, we like to say, Black man, how oppressed we are, but the person that's more oppressed than us is the Black woman. So our female counterparts are more oppressed than us, and they're the mothers. They're the mothers of this country. So why would we want to disrespect them? So that's my thing. That's my fight. And I think as a man, and bringing men together, that's the general consensus of most men. The sad reality is that nobody knows that. They put a lot of men into a bucket and think that we're all alike, but we're not. You know what I mean? There's a lot of good men out there that say the same thing that I say. They just don't say it as loud as I say it. If that makes sense, right? Why? I don't know. I don't know if they want to use their platform for that, or if that's their platform. And I really don't know why they don't. But I know that when I do have the conversations with them and I do talk with them, they're behind me 100%. They support everything it is that we're doing. And most men, like I say, I'm working on this now, is to get more men to come out and speak out and do a PSA about violence against women or ending violence against women. So I always get a lot of credit. And a lot of people think that I'm doing something that is valuable to a lot of people, and that I'm the only one. But I'm not. I keep telling everybody I'm not. There's a lot of great men out there, man, that's doing some of the same things that I'm doing. They're just not kicking the can or making as much noise that I'm doing that I am. But they're with me in this fight, and that's the important part.
And there's another thing that comes up in this conversation, and obviously that is institutional racism and health disparities. Where do those issues come in when you talk about domestic violence?
Well, it's our community, man. It's our community. We're, even when it comes to law enforcement enforcing the domestic violence issues within our community, even when they go on the domestic violence call, we're treated differently in our community. And that's something that we found out. And that's something we're working with law enforcement on, because our organization, that we do partner with law enforcement. So we do have these conversations with them about how victims of color are being treated when they call law enforcement. And we see it all the time. We see the differences, the disparities all the time when a victim of color is calling law enforcement as opposed to a white person calling law enforcement, or even a Hispanic person calling law enforcement.
And let me expand on that. Who are the most high-risk domestic violence victims? Is it African American, Caucasian, Hispanic?
That everybody's at risk. Everybody's at risk, and everybody keeps thinking that one risk is higher than the other risk. I think that all females are at risk. The important thing that we talk about most is the lethality, right? The people who are murdered from domestic violence, and that's when it's across the board. It's just about even. It's about even. But if you go on a percentage of call basis, and I like to think of it as being more educated, that we educate the community more so they understand what domestic violence is. They call more, right? So the more you know, the more you're educated, the more you start calling law enforcement and say, this is wrong, right? And law enforcement's here to help me, so I'm going to call them. So we're calling, people of color are calling more. So the perception would be that it happens more in our community, but that's not necessarily the truth. I mean, there's a lot of communities that it happens in and people don't even call law enforcement. So it happens a lot. We just don't call.
And also from the Human Rights Watch, it says this quote, reports of increase in gender-based violence mask a larger risk that women in the shadows and margins of society will suffer violence without remedy or reprieve if governments, that is, don't act quickly. How do you hope to work with local and state governments to make certain that there is remedy or reprieve for these victims?
We work with legislators all the time, trying to. You have to educate them as well. A lot of people think that people know what they know. I mean, even judges need education. Law enforcement needs education. Laws change all the time, and not even though the chiefs might know it, not all of his Indians know it, or so to speak, not everybody that works for him knows all the laws, and it's based upon interpretation to them sometimes. So all you can do is educate. And law enforcement needs to be educated. They need to be more empathetic towards victims as well. That's something that you can't teach anyone, is how to be empathetic towards another person's cause. So that's something with time, and something that has to come from top down. If it's important to the chief, it should become important to all of his peers as well.
And obviously, you just mentioned this just a few minutes ago, but the fifth annual Hope Walk, which is against domestic violence, that's going to happen Saturday, September 19th at 8 a.m. across the Ravenel Bridge. And ironically, today is the 15th anniversary of the Ravenel Bridge. But from 5 years ago to right now, what are you walking on besides hope?
That is a great question. That is a great question. We're walking basically not only for awareness, right? Not only to make more people aware of the issues that we have, but each year we have like a theme for what we want people to understand. This year, our theme is our children, how our children are affected by domestic violence, right? A few years ago, we did men. We had men come out, and we had men come out to their significant others. So each year we have a different theme that we want to base towards our community, because domestic violence evolves, it changes, and there's different, we feel like there's so many things that we can talk about when it comes to domestic violence. So you can't put it all into just one little basket. So every year we change the theme of it. And this year we're talking about our kids. We're bringing our kids out, how kids are affected by domestic violence, because a lot of people don't realize that they're in the house when all this goes on. Sure. And later down the line, they're going to be affected by this in one way or another. And so it's our responsibility to educate our kids. And on this day, on September the 19th, we got young kids that were present at the worst time for their parents, and their parents are no longer with us. So they were present at those times. So it's a hard, difficult situation. It's always difficult for me to hear these stories, but it helps. Not only does it help the victim and empowers the victim, but it helps the community to hear and to know, and law enforcement to now see, okay, I missed that, right? I didn't know that there were kids involved. I didn't know there were kids in the house. So now we need to address this issue as well and figure out how we can fix this, or how we can have, get help for these kids that are now in the cycle of abuse as well.
Obviously, we're ending domestic violence 5-10 years from now.
Right. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You broke up on me on that one.
How do you hope to help the community in domestic violence 5-10 years from now?
How do I hope? I'm hoping, and I've always hoped this, that through education, that it decreases. Every year the state of South Carolina has an event where they talk about all of the people who we lost in the state for domestic violence. The Attorney General has this event. It's called the Silent Witnessing Event. I'm hoping that those numbers dwindle. South Carolina has been in the top 10 of the states of men that murder women for the past 20 plus years. I'm hoping in the next 5 to 10 years, we can get out of the top 10. And through education and teaching people, what domestic violence is, and the lethality of domestic violence, and getting those guns away from abusers when we know that they're abusers, right? We get those guns away from them, and that would help. I think that would lessen the numbers. I think South Carolina would get out of the top 10 when it comes to killing women or killing their significant others. I think it was 2 years ago, we had more men that were murdered in the state of South Carolina by their abusers than ever. We had like 12 men that were murdered by their abusers. And I'd never seen that number before. So yeah, it's
yeah. And what other numbers are you looking at right now?
The numbers we're not looking right now. We'll look in September when the Attorney General brings them out. So and then we'll look. Even here in Charleston, you turn on the news and you hear about it all the time. I mean, it's hard to believe that Deja Dantley was killed right out Citadel Mall, right in broad daylight. So it's hard to believe Ebony Claire was killed right around the corner from off Dorchester Road, and she was shot in a neighborhood right within maybe 50 yards of a school. And the gun was found 2 or 3 days later. So the gun was just laying out there. It was found 2 or 3 days later by the family. The gun that they used to murder her, and kids walked that way to school every day. it's amazing that one of the kids didn't find that gun. So I mean, there's a lot that we need to address in our community, and we're working towards addressing a lot of those things. My sister's house is an amazing resource in this community. They do a lot more than just house victims, and a lot of people don't understand what they do. That's why it's important that we try to funnel victims through My Sister's House as often as we can, because they give a lot more support as well. They do counseling, they do all kinds of things that are great for victims, and we just need more of that. And it's sad to say we shouldn't need more of that. That's just a sad reality of our times, that we need it, but we do.
Butch Kennedy, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
It's always good to see you, Quintin, man. It's always good to see you. This is a tough subject, man, but you know, as men, I'm glad that we're talking about it. I'm glad we're having this conversation, and I like to have this conversation with many men. So thank you for what it is that you do, man. I've always said, man, I love listening to your show. Just glad I finally get a seat at the table every now and again and sit there and holler at you every now and again. So you take care of yourself, my brother.
Well, likewise.